No, sorry.
Test.
How we doing, guys?
Yeah, good.
Just about awake in here.
Yeah, MC Fixer there. We'll do proper introductions then. He's like, you're making me get up at what time?
I weren't happy. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was like 11.
What time did you have to get up this morning?
7.
7, is that it?
No, but I get up at that time regularly to stream. So I wanted a lie-in for Saturday.
No, it can't.
No, clearly not. Clearly not.
But obviously, just so we can begin, would you like to introduce yourselves properly, what you do, where we might know you from? We'll start with Laura and then we'll work our way along.
Hi, I'm Laura Kate Dale. I go by LauraKBuzz on the internet. I am an author, streamer. I do video game reviews on the internet and do lots and lots of podcasts, write books, and that sort of thing. I am a trans woman, and I've been full-time working in the games industry for about 7 years now.
Damn, this is a big one to follow, isn't it? I go by the name of MC Fixer. Used to be a rapper, now full-time content creator. Been in the industry about 6 years now, full-time for about 3, podcasting, hosting, all that good stuff. Tazziii?
So I am Tazziii. I am an online content creator. I do Twitch streams, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, anything online. I also co-host a podcast with my mother and help run a gaming event among tons of other things. Yeah.
So basically, these are all the talents. I'm the idiot that gets to chat them. That's how it kind of works.
I was thinking it. I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, that's right. This is going to be a fun panel. I'm already getting bullied. I like it. I love it. So obviously, this panel is such an important topic. It's something that is starting to come more to the forefront, which has been needed for many, many years. But obviously, the term diversity covers so many different aspects as well. But the sort of first thing I want to talk to you about is, why is diversity so important to you guys? Why do we need to kind of get this message across? That we'll go into more detail soon, but why is it important we keep pushing diversity in the media and events like this?
So I came out as trans about a decade ago, and I knew that trans people existed for a long time before that, but all I had ever seen growing up was depictions of trans people in media that were villainous, monstrous, terrible people. Think of sort of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, like either as a laughing stock, a punchline, or something to be feared and seen as deceitful and evil. And that really screws with you, seeing yourself only presented in negative stereotypes, negative lights, negative attributions. And it was enough that for years I didn't want to admit to the world who I was. I very vividly remember there's a piece of media that, it's not a great piece of media, but it was a very big impetus in me feeling okay with coming out. And it was an anime called Wandering Sun. And it's only like 12 episodes long. It's about 2 children who happen to be trans or gender non-conforming, who are trying to work out like, hey, what's going on with me? And it wasn't anything spectacular. It was 2 just respectfully handled trans characters explaining how they felt in non-sensationalized terms. I watched it and I came out that same night because all I had needed was some piece of hope in media that said, it's okay to be you and there are people like you who understand who you are, and to not present that as something terrible and to be ashamed of. And that's the power of representation. It can really mess with you to only see yourself represented in negative terms. It really impacts how you see yourself, and having something positive to look to really helps to know that you're okay being you.
Yeah, I think for me it's, again, I'm mixed raced, so you look across media and I don't think a lot of shows get mixed race characters perfect, if I'm being totally honest. You see a lot of white side of things, you see maybe a black side of things. You don't always see a mixed side of things, which can be extremely complicated, because in my feeling, in my life, it's always been not black enough for the black kids, not white enough for the white kids. So where do I sit? Because obviously we're in a different world right now with diversity, right? So there's a lot of pro-black things. It's like, well, am I a part of that? But then obviously someone will look at you and go, well, you're not black, you're mixed race. So it's important to have these conversations about diversity. We come in all different shapes and sizes. We all have different personality traits. Not everyone's loud, not everyone's shy, not everyone's... It's just important to talk about who you are as a person and have that be portrayed across the world in all forms of media, video games, TV shows, films, comic books, whatever it may be. And I think for me, I just want to be able to talk about my experience. We get black people get stereotyped very much as we're drug dealers, we're gangsters, we're basketball players, we're this, we're that. I'm just some nerd that plays video games and streams on Twitch, and that's who I am. Where's that portrayal? And we're slowly getting there, but it's still a complicated issue of being mixed, which I don't think many people understand unless you're mixed.
First of all, Laura, I've got I'm trying holding back tears right now from your story because it's so moving and beautiful. It's just that hope that you got. I'm having an emotional weekend, okay?
It's okay, that's why we're here.
Do you know what? I didn't realise how important diversity was to me personally until very recently, and I'm still learning how important it is personally to me. The more and more I get involved with pushing diversity, but I always knew it was important, and that's because I've been raised diversely, I guess. I've never been sort of one to fit into one category, or even in my family we range from all shades. All the shades are in my family. And my mum's always been very keen to make sure I'm exposed to all different types of people and never be judgmental. She worked in the volunteer sector, and I tagged along with her from being a toddler. And just in the volunteer sector, you naturally get a lot of diverse people of all different types of ethnicities, of genders, of sexuality, of neurodiversity. So I'm just used to being around it, and so it just made sense. I didn't know why it was important. It just was well, all people should be presented because all people exist. But then the more I've got involved, the more I've realised all these subconscious things about myself that I didn't realise, I didn't understand why things weren't sitting with me. And then as well representation of the people around me, realising oh, you're not presented, oh, this makes you feel like this, oh, you didn't realise you didn't feel comfortable coming out until you saw yourself. And the more I talk to people and the more I get involved, I'm oh, just because it doesn't affect me as harshly, I'm used to not fitting in, so I don't really care about the representation of myself. Not so, that's the wrong word, but as I listened to other people's stories and how much it affected them, I was this is so important. And I think being mixed race and understanding where you fit in between the lines.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah, or not understand. Just being in this weird bit in the middle, that it gives you this almost superpower that you can be really understanding because you've always had to deal with not quite fitting in and never really, but kind of also always fitting in.
You're always fitting in, and it's mixed race is in right now as well. Don't get it twisted, right? Don't get it twisted. But yeah, I know, I agree with you. It's you fit in the certain groups you're in, but then you also don't fit in very specific other groups, which is hard.
Jumping on something you were saying about sometimes not realising how important representation is until you start unpacking that stuff where you're oh, I didn't even realise that it sort of hit me. That can be a really big thing, and I think that's something that people who see themselves represented a lot in media might not always understand, is what some of those nuances can mean in terms of how you see yourself. One that was very recent for me to start unpacking was I have a lot of weird stuff about not feeling I'm allowed to have days where I don't push myself to present femininely. And a lot of that I look back at later and I'm oh, it's not just that there was negative representation of say trans people, it's that trans people who were presented negatively were always presented as not being as effectively invisible as female, for example, and all of the positive representation we've had in recent years has been very invisibly, no, you can't tell they're trans, and things like that, I see why people were trying to push a representation that way, but sometimes it leads you to things you have to unpack, and it's a lot.
That's why we're here, right, for the conversation.
And the conversation needs to happen. We need to have these sort of panels, get people aware, get people to think about it as well. And obviously having that conversation, we have Pride Month, we have Black History Month and everything like that. And obviously I can't speak on behalf of other people, but just from looking at it, it's like you see a business, oh, it's Gay Pride Month, look, we've got rainbows up everywhere. Right, it's the end of the month, right, get that down, forget about it, don't do anything. And the question I want to kind of present is, what should businesses and organisations be doing more, not just ticking a box for a certain month just to kind of go, oh well, no, we do support you, we did this all the way through April, well we did this all the way through May. What do businesses, organisations need to do to kind of help you guys out?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because I used to be of the mind of the best person should get the applicant, should get the job. That was my mindset until I really understood what that meant. And unfortunately, the person sitting opposite you, interviewing you, already has their bias. Doesn't matter what it is. So, obviously Black History Month is right now. I'm sure most of you wouldn't know it, because it just doesn't get celebrated like that. It does in America, it doesn't quite over here. And like you said, they do it for their tiny moments. There's certain companies of websites of which I work on, which they do their select few, here's the circle around these people, and you lot can be special for one day of this 1 month, and we will care about you for now, and then
we'll see you in the air, cheers.
We did our bit. We did our bit. How can we change it? It comes from the ground up, it comes from top to bottom. It's, if you're in a workplace where you don't see many black people of colour, let's just say it like that, you need to be the voice in there. If that's something you actually want to change, to have different opinions and different voices and different ways different people speak, you need to kind of be the change of that and be like, hey, have you noticed there's only white people here? And that's something I noticed. I've worked in McDonald's, I've worked in every job, you name it, retail, I've been there, I've done it, you know? So for me, I've seen different elements of it in different, I've worked in offices, I've worked with just white people, and then you're the black guy. So they come to you like, hey, what's this? What do we do? I'm like, oh no. Well, what do you mean? Well, because I'm mixed and I'm black and I should have all the answers. It's not how it works, right? So I think it starts at the top. Again, you need more black CEOs, you need more black people in power, or people of colour in power, so we can get different voices. Because when you go for an interview, it's a little bit different, right? Because there's different opinions in the room, which we don't have at the moment.
This year I have had a really stark experience of being invited to do huge amounts of really big work during Pride Month that completely dropped off when that ended, and this has always been a thing that happens every year, and this year I tried to do something slightly different, and I don't know how much of an impact it's going to have. Every time I was invited to do some paid work in Pride Month by some company, I would do it, and then at the end of it I'd say, I've never seen you do this outside of Pride Month. Have you thought about that? And it was just a little passing thing, and I know that for me to say that might mean that they don't want to work with me in future. That might be a bit more pushing than they're into. But
they're lost.
Yeah, but like again, that's a thing that maybe as an audience watching you should be looking for, is if you see there is a month in which suddenly a bunch of creators of one type are being brought onto a project you like, and then that cuts off when that month ends. Maybe ask the people, hey, why did you stop doing that? It was really cool seeing those new people involved. Yeah, why do you only do it in this month? Because it's an awkward question, and if you're the person being invited on, it's a hard question to ask without feeling like you're shutting opportunities for yourself in future. But I think it's just a case of often they don't think about the fact they're doing it. They don't realise that they see it as, oh look, we're giving extra representation, rather than thinking, wait, why don't we just do this year round?
I love that, and I love what you said, because I have a pet peeve when it comes to pushing diversity, which is shaming companies or shaming people that lack diversity, which I get where that comes from, and I think it's a valid feeling. But I also don't think it helps to push diversity, because when you feel shame, you shut down and you don't want to be accepted, you don't want to do that. And what you did there is kind of be like, hey, by the way, I'm not shaming you for this, but I'm just pointing out that maybe you could be doing better. And I think using Black History Month and Pride Month and any sort of big movement to maybe shine light on something is great, but then we need to carry on that same energy going forward and think, oh yeah, I realise that I've been falling short here. Now where can we put things in place to make it comfortable for these diverse groups to exist within these areas continuing going forward? What initiatives can we carry on throughout the year? What can we use now to use this point as like a push?
Yeah, I feel like part of the way to do it is to do good work when you're invited during those months, and to then maybe present it as an opportunity for those companies to bring other people up with you outside of Pride Month. So do it as like, hey, it was really great to work with you. I would love to do so again in future. As a little note though, you do only seem to do this during Pride Month, or whatever month. Here are some other creators that fit that bill that you should look at inviting outside of Pride Month, and giving it as an opportunity for them to feel like, oh yeah, we can do something cool, not as if you have done something bad here.
Yeah, it's super important for people like us, if we get opportunities, right, to put other people forward, but not the same other people forward, which is what I find is a big problem. I get offered an opportunity and they say, oh, we want somebody. It's important for me to go, cool, this person, and then this person, oh, they did a great job. It's important for us to come out of our circles as well and find new people of colour, voices. Everyone's different, and that's kind of the point. If you go to the same 4 voices, it's just as bad as having only the same 4 white voices. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's part of what companies do wrong in a big way. It's like, you speak for all of these people. It's like, well, hold up. No, I'm in touch. I know how to reach them, but you don't speak for everybody. And there's lots of mini groups that are doing a lot of talking for a lot of everybody, and it's hard because if you're not part of that circle, you're not part of it.
Do you not find the businesses kind of forget the main point of it, and it's about humans? They see it as a corporate thing. They're saying, right, well, we want this person, this person, this person. Well, actually, no. They're a human being, they're a human being, and they're a human being, and they kind of forget the humanity of it all, and it's about support, looking after each other, and getting everybody kind of involved.
They don't care.
Big time.
Honest.
Oh my god. Yeah. I'm like, do you know what I'm thinking about to me? Like, I'm not your token black person because I'm mixed race. Like, yeah, black is part of me and it's part of my history. But like, oh boy, I can talk from my experiences that other mixed race people might relate to, but I'm not your token.
I think that there is a real overlap both in creators being invited to do work during months that are to do with their identity, and also media representations of those groups. And the thing they both have in common is, if you only have one person from a particular group represented or listened to, that person is expected to speak for the entire group. If you have multiple perspectives that differ in background from a group, you get a much more rounded view, where one person's perspective doesn't have to be representative of the entire group. The same is true if you're bringing people in to advise you on how do we make things better in terms of representation, or if you're making characters from that group, have more than one.
And that's actually coming up to the next thing. So I want to talk about representation in TV and film, and I think when I gave you the example of all the shows which I just absolutely adore and how they've done it, is Sex Education, where because one of the most frustrating things is, right, we're going to have a gay character, right, their whole storyline is then no one knows, but they're going to secretly come out, and that's the big storyline for them. And like, oh, this character is from a certain background, and then this is going to be their storyline. It's always the same story, but what I loved about Sex Education is it's not a big deal. This is the characters, and we're telling stories about these characters, but yes, they're pan, they're bi, they're black, and they just didn't make a big deal about this all. It was about, these are humans, these are characters that are this, but that's not what their storyline's about.
It's almost like they don't define them as a human being, right?
Yeah. But what would you like to see more in TV and film and this sort of representation?
One thing I would really like to see is the companies behind a lot of pieces of media standing behind the decision to just have characters be those identities without feeling the need to justify it. Because a lot of what you see when you have those kinds of representation you were talking about, where you just have a character and that's not what their story's about, is people going, well, why did you make them like that? Like, what was the reason for them being like that? As if you need a reason to represent people who are diverse, because that's what the world is. And I think a big thing is that the people making shows need to not just ignore that that's a sentiment that happens and say, we did it because that's how life is. Sometimes people, their stories don't revolve around their identity. That's just a part of them.
Most of the time, people's stories don't revolve around their identities.
I think it's the companies that are making it be that, right?
Yeah, like...
To get a foot in the door, I have to, look, again, I've been doing this 6 years, right? I've only started getting my blow up lately. Why? Because they've gone, whoops, there's no black people in there. Who do we know? Oh, we know that guy. That's what it is. So yeah, I think in games, for me, that's my main medium, right? It's about portraying stories that have not already been told. We've heard the gangster was a gangster, now he's a drug dealer, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it, it's done. Yeah, that's one black story. Cool. But what about like the kid from a council estate who was working his butt off, who then became a lawyer, who then put food on the table for his family, bought his mum a house? Don't hear about that story, because it doesn't sell. Because they're gangsters, they're drug dealers.
It's the stereotypes, isn't it? Everyone has this, it's horrible, but people are very, like, have stereotypes in the mind. They have that, without even knowing it, that kind of discrimination in the back of the head. We all judge people, we're like that, but it's when people start acting on those prejudices, that's when we have the problems. And if they don't have the writers who actually understand those characters, like, let's be fair, it's mainly probably white males that are doing a lot of the writing. They don't know the stories, the backgrounds and the problems and the battles that you guys have, what we all have, and they've just got one side. So rather than having one writer, why don't you have, say, 4 from different backgrounds and then tell a good story?
Yeah, one of the things as well, because we talk a lot about having diverse people in like the making of things and production. Having people that have diverse friendship groups. Because I actually have a lot of white friends who are very understanding because they listen. They have diverse friendship groups, and their unconscious biases are the same as these people who are in power or in the production that have these unconscious biases because they just don't expand their friendship groups. All their friends are like these other middle-class, white, cisgendered people. And they're like, huh, I didn't think about that. It's like, yeah, because you've never had a conversation with someone. Like, have diverse people around you. Like, talk to people, get to know people. And then suddenly you'll change, you'll find other people's perspectives. Mad. Revolutionary.
One personal real bugbear in terms of trying to write diverse stories that I get as someone that sometimes get asked to do consulting work is so often stories are written by a group of writers that does not involve any of the people being represented, and then once it's written and they're basically ready to film it or record it or program it or whatever, they will then come to diverse people and go, can you fix what we've written? There's a limit to what we can actually change because we're quite far in production, but can you fix the worst bit? Like, rather than getting people in at the start of the process to do it right, they do a lot of things wrong and then expect you to put the emotional labour in to fix their mistakes and explain to them every mistake they've made along the way.
You're like, at that point, burn it down, start again.
I mean, that's
surely it makes everything harder.
Oh, 100%. Like, you spend half your time just explaining what's wrong rather than getting on with writing a good thing, and it's like, just get people in from the start of production.
But what they do at the end is they go, oh yes, we should have done better, we'll do that in the future, but then it's like, well, no, you haven't, you're just completing the cycle.
I mean, and then I love this excuse at the end, they're like, oh yeah, like we didn't get someone in to consult, and we heard that we should change it, but it was too expensive, and we're like,
yeah, so sometimes things don't even get changed. I know people in consulting across various media industries who've told horror stories of being brought in to consult on projects, giving their feedback, none of it being acted on, and their name still showing up as a consultant at the end of projects, and it's looked really bad for them because people in their group have gone, wait, why did you sign off on them presenting us like that? And it's like, no, I told them to change it. a lot of the time it feels like consultants are brought in to tick a box and say they did it, rather than because they actually want to make the story right.
One thing as well when we're talking about especially like film and TV is I actually do like supporting artist work, so if you don't know it as that name, it used to be called extras. They just, the whole process is not set up to have background artists that are people of colour, that have hair and face skin tones that they can't deal with. Even down to the so how you like get the job, like they send out a thing and they're like, hey, can you send a picture of you today within the next few hours with your hair out and natural? And I'm like, my hair is in braids right now, I can't do that. And then they're like, oh, why do we not get like diverse backgrounds? And it's like, well, because your whole process is already cutting people off. And I've noticed it in films that might have like a TV that might have a diverse like cast, their main cast, and then background artists. It's like, oh look, and now they all just look the same.
Also, something I wanted to bring up, there was talk of sort of stereotypes and how they're used in writing of characters. One thing that I always find fascinating is the stereotypes that aren't used by writers outside of specific groups that are positive, known things within those communities. Like, I'm always surprised that we don't get more media about trans women that are hackers and coders, for example. Like, that's, within trans circles, that's, everyone knows that trans people do a lot of coding and end up in coding. It doesn't really show up in media. Autistic people having, for example, like verbal or happy stims, having like verbal things they do when happy that are repetitive sounds. There's things that are like very known to the people who experience certain backgrounds or communities that are completely overlooked, and those always feel like really obvious signs that, okay, whoever was behind this probably was coming from an outside perspective. It's always interesting the things that like seem so obvious to you that other like writers don't seem to see.
And I think in gaming as well, it's one of those areas where, well, we've probably all seen the news on kind of the background of the games companies and the people behind them, and it's only again very recently, a brilliant example is Deathloop, where it's actually the main guys are black. And it was great to see that we had people on social media saying, well, actually, you always use these white gamers, these big famous gamers, you've got two black main characters in this game, we want to see people, well, you could probably talk about this.
But even that was a fight. That wasn't just a given. Like, they had two main black characters, right? So who would you go to then talk to about that game with your press kits and your codes for reviews, and you're telling the story? We all know who, right? People of colour. That was a fight that had to be happened. Like, it wasn't just a given. They didn't go, oh yeah, we're marketing this game to a certain demographic. Everyone can play it, obviously, but let's use black influencers. Let's use people of colour who are influencers. No, it was a fight to get there. Even I got a press pack from them, but I know other people who didn't. And again, it's that circle. And I get that you're not going to know everyone, obviously. But an email sent to me that says, do you know any other people of colour creators? And I'll go, yeah, this person, this person, this person, this person. Are they good at what they do? Well, I'm not going to give you people that are not good at what they do. I understand everyone can't have everything, but the same people don't need everything, you know?
And obviously you've got games where, one of the games that I think is just amazing is Life is Strange as well, and just like, if you look at the impact that game has had on so many people and made them feel confident about talking about sexuality, and it's just, these games have so much impact that people aren't necessarily aware of. Do we need to see more of those games? Companies need to take these risks because they say, right, if we don't have a white action star kind of character in this game, we're not going to make money. But they need to have that range and that kind of taking that risk.
Yeah, in terms of video game companies taking risks, something I want to point out that I don't think a lot of people like think about, I cannot point out any video game, like big AAA video game with a trans playable character. Don't think I can do it. Like a single player story that is a story where like the character you play through the story as is a trans character. barely a thing. That is like, there are certain like, I can't think of a game with a playable autistic lead, for example. There are like big demographics. I can't think of a single big budget video game our industry has touched with certain demographics, and I think that's a pretty clear sign. Our industry is still scared to like take risks and to do proper firsts in a lot of cases.
I think Tell Me Why was a big one for me. Me and Laura did a podcast on it after every single episode. Just talk about the game, me, Laura, and Crash. And so much the game may not have been perfect, but the conversation that we had after the game made me learn so much. And that's kind of what's more important than just the video game. It's the conversation that happens around the video game.
Yeah, that game is definitely the closest in terms of like trans main characters in a biggish budget thing that I think we've had that got it right. And
Still got stuff wrong.
Yeah, it still got stuff wrong, but it was fantastic. And like the fact that it had never happened before and we haven't seen anyone do it since is like, we're missing out.
So don't get me wrong, I love my, heroic male white lead character. Like, give me some Nathan Drake and Joel. Love Master Chief. Like, love these guys. I do. I adore them. But I do also want to see a lot more different characters. And the thing is, as well, when the companies do take these risks, they kind of like half-heartedly market them and kind of like preemptively expect them to do badly and create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because they're kind of like, oh yeah, but they don't give them the full like, here you go, here's this amazing thing. They don't like commit to it, and they don't stand behind it. They don't like stand go, we created this amazing thing with this lead, and yeah, just that's what it takes. It's like really standing behind your creation and giving it a chance, and giving it a chance to have its own voice, and giving it to the people that are going to appreciate it so that they can, rather than giving it to the people that are going to be like, oh, why do we need to have this diverse character? You're just trying to hit a quota.
Yeah, it must be like the character customizations on games as well. Like, I didn't realise there were so many different versions of the colour white, but then you only get 2 options for anything else. Why isn't that range there? Because, like, say, mixed race...
Don't get me started on hair.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Please do that. We could do a whole panel just on hair.
Come back next MCM, we're going to talk about hair colour in games.
Honestly, I think NBA 2K22 was like the closest game where I was like, oh, there's actually some decent hairstyles here. But it's a pain. It's a pain. Especially in certain games, you want to portray yourself in, right? So you're trying to create a character. You're trying to create a character that can represent you, and you can't even get the hairstyle. I can't get a skin fade that actually looks good. It's really annoying.
The same like 2 hairstyles for like all black people.
If you ain't got an afro,
it's the same afro.
If you ain't got an afro, you're in trouble. You're in trouble.
One thing I think is a really big problem is the games industry in general does not have confidence in the people who play games to not be terrible. A really big example I saw like this past week is the Dark Pictures anthology House of Ashes has just come out.
Oh, yeah.
It is a horror game set in 2003 Iraq, where most of the playable characters are US Marines just after 9/11. One of the playable characters is an Iraqi soldier. All of the marketing leading up to that game's existence completely buried his existence, did not give you any insight to who he was as a person. All the other characters, there were demos you could play through, like, oh, here's these 2 bickering about their relationship.
We got Ashley Tisdale.
Yeah, we got Ashley Tisdale. You don't need to talk about, like, the counter perspective of someone who is not an American white person in the army. Like, they will bury diverse perspectives because they are afraid of audience pushback, and that is something our industry really needs to reckon with, is the video game industry is terrified of people going, that's someone different.
Let them get mad. I'm all here for letting them get mad. We're mad.
Yeah.
And I'm fed up of us.
They'd be angry for once.
As evil people because we're mad that we're not represented. Like,
I think it's just games on different sizes and scales as well, right? I just want to see a lot more indie devs take risks as well, which I know it's harder for them because they don't have the funding for it. So it is the companies like Microsoft who they have Game Pass. They can afford to lose money on games because they make so much money on everything else. So they can take the risk. And obviously they did do Tell Me Why. Obviously Life is Strange is a great a great game as well, but I'd like to see more and more and more of it in video games especially, because that's the medium I love, obviously, and that's where I feel stories are more impactful for me, and not just in text. As someone who's dyslexic, don't tell me a great story and someone spent so many hours on this great story just in text form, and it's walls and walls and walls of text. I don't ever get to see it. I don't ever get to see it, I don't ever get to experience it. Like, it needs to be in the forefront. I need to know about this character, what they're going through, and how they feel in a well done way, obviously.
Let's share mics now. We've got very little time left, but the final thing I want to kind of finish on is how can people support more? I know it can be a very awkward conversation, but it's conversations that kind of need to happen. Like, it'd be weird for me, like, if I'm just saying, dude, I saw what more can I do to support you? What can I do?
Follow me on Twitter, at MCFixer.
Well,
Instagram,
that is the best plug I've
Twitch.
heard in a while.
You got phones, everyone? At MCFixer, feel free. Yeah, I got you. Alright, cool.
But what can people do to kind of show that support? And obviously, I think as well, it's like people being confident enough to reach out and say, look, this is happening. Has anyone had this experience before? It's that conversation, and what can people do moving forward? We're starting to get momentum, but what can we do to keep that momentum going?
Talk about groups you are not a part of and their representation needs, not just your own interests and the things that matter to you. Be aware that a lot of representation will not matter to you, it won't make a difference to you. Like, as a white person, I know that I have a responsibility to be vocal with companies about like better representing and like having contact with non-white people. Cis people need to be better about going to companies and saying, have more trans characters, have more trans representation, do that better. Criticism is more likely to be listened to and internalized by big corporations if it is not the people affected complaining about it. And that shouldn't be the case. The people who were impacted should be the people seen as experts on their own representation and their own needs. That is not how it works. Talk about the groups that don't affect you, because you will be listened to more.
Yeah, all jokes aside about Twitter and things like that, but it's following a diverse group of people. So, you know, if you look down your timeline, who you follow, your favourite creators, what colour are they? Are you following enough black creators, white creators, Indian? Doesn't matter. Insert anybody here. It's having a diverse point of view on what you're watching, and that doesn't mean you have to do it, but finding people that you enjoy, because there are people out there of colour that you will enjoy, that aren't gay, that aren't trans. It doesn't matter. Like, go out there and find them.